Steve Hill is the curator of the Haliburton Highlands Museum, and Steve is retiring after 39 years on January 27th. You know, from the very beginning, Steve has had a passion for museums, as you'll hear. Steve believes that the museum is a type of shrine to the pioneers that broke their back to make the town what it is today. And his efforts and dedication are evident throughout the Haliburton Highlands Museum. And we asked Steve to have a little chat with us to talk about his long career. And we say, welcome, Steve. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
You're more than welcome. And I want to start right at the beginning and ask you, Steve, how on earth did you get so interested in museums?
Well, when I was a kid, I was the only kid on the street in my age bracket, so there wasn't a lot of kids my age to play with. So I used to spend time with a lot of the old timers on the street, the retired people, and I'd help them with their grass cutting and their hedge clipping and just hanging around the old people. And they'd be telling me stories of the days they had growing up. And these would be people from the 1890s, and they remembered the town before there was any pavement, and they talked about the horse and buggy, about the milk wagon with the horse, and how they had to crank their first car to get it running. And this is a different world. This is interesting. They intrigued me, these folks, and I just kind of took an interest to what they had to say.
Now, I know that at age 16, you got your first job in a museum. How did that come about?
Oh, that was kind of easy. I went up there and spoke to them when I was 14. I came back when I was 15. Both years they had to turn me down because they said you had to be 16 to get on the program. So it was a museum that I always went to as a kid. I go there quite frequently because I was interested in the different things within their collection. They had some nice old tools and fabulous pictures on the walls, and there was always something new coming in. And there was old timers at the museum as volunteer tour guides, and when it was slow, we'd sit down and they'd start talking shop about the good old days. And I thought, I like listening to these people. It's interesting what they have to say, and they kind of got me hooked into history even more so.
So how did that lead to getting a formal education in museum studies?
Well, when I was 16 and I started at the museum full time, they said to me, "Do you know that there's an actual museum course?" They figured I was actually interested, and maybe they break the news. They said, somewhere up in Ottawa, there's a place called Algonquin College has a museum training program. I wonder if you might want to just file that away for future reference. So from the time I was 16 onward, I figured there's where I'm heading off to. And that's what I did. I mean, I know it sounds tunnel vision and single-minded, but I thought if I could learn to work in a field that I enjoy the aspects of the field, why wouldn't I? Because I knew what it was like for me father to come home every night in a bad mood because he had a lousy day at the office. And I thought, I don't want that.
Well, you obviously made the right choice. And I understand while you were in Ottawa going to school that you got some part-time work at the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. What was that like, that experience?
Oh, that was fabulous. I worked with a fella named Captain John Chown, and Mr. Chown, he was one of the first adults I ever met that said, call me John, because I grew up, it was like Mr. and Mrs., they're your elders. He said, oh, call me John, which, okay, he was a bit older than my father. But anyway, he used to walk us through different of the weapons. He'd say, come on into the weapons vault for a minute. I'm going to show you something. And he'd go into the vault and he'd pull a gun off the rack and he'd describe it and say, this is this and this is that, and this technology predates that one over there, and he'd go and get another one. He'd show you the different mechanisms, and he'd explain the military significance. And he was, after all the bad mouthing of Sir Sam Hughes in Canadian history class in high school, he was the first person I ever met who stuck up for Sir Sam Hughes. And I thought, good for him. He's got a counter argument and he can defend his point of view.
That part-time work was very much like getting another education.
Actually, it was. And Mr. Chown said different of us that he actually allowed into the vault. This is a privilege that we can't extend to everybody, but some years when we get interested summer students, they're not just here for a paycheck. I don't mind taking them in the vault and showing them the different guns and just teaching them if they're interested. So I thought, you know what? If I'm that privileged, then I'm going to make the most of it, because he considers my summer student colleagues to be worthy of it. Then listen to what he has to say and soak it up, because he's sincere about passing on his information.
That's pretty exciting stuff. Now, after you finished Algonquin College, where did you think you were going to get some permanent employment?
Well, I wasn't too sure, but I had started out at the museum down in a place called Markham, a farming community that's all factories and houses now. And I was promised they would fight tooth and nail to get me onto the staff there. But when push came to shove and I graduated, they conveniently forgot what they told me. So I was actually 3 years in the wilderness, working part-time at renovation, painting, snow shoveling. And in the meantime, while I was unemployed for those 3 years, I enrolled in a cabinet making course at Georgian College in Barrie. That was a 1-year course. That was fabulous. I learned a lot about cabinet making. I'm not a cabinet maker, but I learned an appreciation for the skill, and the time it takes to set up a job is probably even more important than carrying out the job itself. And I do know that when I took that course, the instructors said to me, "You're the slowest one in here, but damn, your work is good," which I took as a compliment. And at the end of the course, the head instructor said, "I don't think you should follow up cabinet making as a profession. You do really good work, but time is money and you're too slow. But you could turn your skills into furniture refinishing and so forth." And I thought, you know what? He came right out and he said that in all kindness. And I thought, maybe if I am slow, maybe I'm on the wrong track here. But jumping ahead a bit, when I was hired in Haliburton here, Mr. Carver, who hired me, it turns out one of the reasons he hired me was the cabinet making. And I put that to good use in repairing a lot of the furniture and artifacts at the museum. So it paid off. But while I was unemployed, besides the cabinet making course, I also spent a few months down near Sarnia in a place called Moore Township. There was the Moore Museum, or as I like to call it, the Moore Township Museum. That way people can relate to it. And it was right there on the St. Clair River, and it had a dimension of history that I'd never experienced before. They had the typical small town Ontario history of farming families, churches, lodges, that sort of thing, everything that was typical of an Ontario town. But they had that one added dimension. They were on the St. Clair River, and the Great Lakes shipping industry was part of the community, and they had quite a maritime history as well. And whatever happened on the Great Lakes mattered to them. And I thought, what an interesting dimension. I'd never seen that before. you can have a museum anywhere, but you can't have a water history if you're not on the water.
That's right.
So it was shortly after I I got through the job in Moortown. I had my name in at the Ontario Museum Association in Toronto. It's a professionals organization, and what they did was they took resumes of all their members that submitted them, and they kept them on file. And if a museum phoned them or contacted them somehow looking for candidates that they could possibly interview to fill a vacancy, could they please send some names? And Mr. Carver, Ross Carver, had started running the Haliburton Highlands Museum back in 1983. And as I understand it, the municipality hired him to put the museum on an even keel and hire some staff to get it running more so. And anyway, Mr. Carver contacted them and they sent them my name, and the rest is history. I came up for the interview with Mr. Carver and I was nervous, but I thought, you know what? Nothing ventured, nothing gained. And he interviewed me, and there was something about Mr. Carver. He had certain attributes reminded me of my father. There was a kind of a fatherly side to him, but I thought, okay, nice guy. I had my interview, everything went well. I'll either never hear from them again or I'll get the regret phone call a week later. So when I was called to the phone a week after the interview, I thought, well, here we go again. Sorry, we can't hire you, but you did really well and so forth. I thought, here we go again. And when I picked up the phone that was handed to me, Mr. Carver said, congratulations, you've been hired by the Haliburton Highlands Museum. I was very impressed with your credentials. And I thought, hey, fooled them. But seriously, I was floored. I don't remember, but he said you let out a whoop that I'd never heard before. He said you were ecstatic. I said, I don't remember that, Mr. Carver, but believe me, I've been 3 years in the wilderness, and finally I had a chance to work in my chosen field. So I came up to Haliburton, and this would be November of 1984. And I started on with Mr. Carver, who he had hired earlier that same year Doug McNichol from Ottawa, who took the same museum technology course as I did, but he was a year behind me, but he was 20 years older than me. He had a career change and he wanted to get into museums. Anyway, I was working there with Mr. Carver and Doug McNichol, and it was a good working relationship. But then Doug, with all due respect, he was by himself and he had a chance to take over the Perth Museum, and all his family was in Perth. And he sort of, even though he'd made lots of friends in Haliburton and he was involved in the Boy Scouts and different organizations, he thought, you know, I'm going to jump ship and go down to Perth to be with my family. And so that created a vacancy. And that's when Mr. Carver hired Tom Ballantyne. So that was in the spring of 1985. So then Tom and I worked together under Mr. Carver until 1987, when Mr. Carver retired. His title was business administrator, and under him was vested curator and director. Well, when he retired, Tom Ballantyne became full-fledged director and I became full-fledged curator. So I worked through for several years with Tom, and when Tom retired in 2012, it's kind of different since, but it's been pretty good. We're still alive and well, and I found it interesting working with Tom. He was of the mind, yeah, I'm the boss, but I value what you have to say. He said, I'm only the boss in the final analysis. If you have an opinion or an idea, let's hear it. Because we're in this together. It's teamwork.
Nice.
And well, Tom and I have our differences politically, but I don't let that get in the way of friendship, and either did Tom. We worked really well together. I'm not boasting, but he used to say about himself, I look after the big picture and you look after the details, and that makes for a good team. So I enjoyed working with Tom, and we watched our attendance grow. We watched the museum develop. We had, well, more so Tom being responsible for this was building the settlers farmstead down the road while I was up in the main building doing my job with the cataloging, repairing the artifacts, and doing some display work. But Tom, with his summer students, they put the log house barn and blacksmith shop up. John Main built the log house, but the summer students under Tom's direction finished it off. Jack Goobser and his gang put the log barn together. And again, the summer students under Tom's direction finished it off. And then our summer students, over a course of 5 years, 5 summers, put the blacksmith shop building together. And it was all teamwork. And Tom treated the summer kids just the same way. He wasn't a slave driver, and that's why people liked working for Tom. So I enjoyed the working relationship, and we got along pretty good. The museum grew, it expanded, and Tom was an archaeology graduate, so he dabbled in some archaeology on the side, but also he and I both were of the understanding that a museum was also an educational center, a resource center for local history. It wasn't just something for people to go look at on a rainy day. It had to have a meaning. If somebody came to the museum with a historical inquiry, you better have some answers. And if you don't have the answers, you better be able to lead them in the right direction. Because more we were getting people inquiring about their family trees or what sawmill was on my lake. And because would have cottagers that moved to the area and they wanted to know about the mill site on their lake. That's the site's there, there's the remnants, whose mill was it, and that sort of thing. And in the earliest years, we even had people were taking motor trips from Western Canada to Haliburton, tracing their roots, and they'd come into the museum and they'd want to know about different of their family, like the Hurt family or the Parsonage family, pioneer families that went west, but these people came east to investigate their roots. And it was interesting, and it was nice to be able to help them when we were able to, and we strove to never send anyone away empty-handed.
Yeah. Now, is this what is so important about the Haliburton Museum and maybe other small museums anywhere in Canada?
I would say so, because a 2-man crosscut saw or a spinning wheel, a butter churn, or a sledgehammer, they're all the same in Haliburton as they are in Windsor or Saskatoon. But if the artifact has a local connection, lay it for what it's worth. If there's local connection as far as people coming in looking for their actual roots, if you can steer them in the right direction, because they come to the museum not to look at spinning wheels and 2-man crosscut saws, they're coming to find out something. They came there to learn, and they'll wander through and look at the displays, but they also want to know more than what's on display. They want to get down into the bowels of the local history, as it were. And we figured we had better develop that aspect, because people are asking us questions that are above and beyond what's this artifact do? And so we really got into taking an interest in the pioneer families and trying to document them, because when we realized the hardships that they lived through, we figured, Holy man, they did all that. They suffered the cold winters, the black flies, maybe a food shortage sometimes, and their descendants are still here. These people deserve a medal. They worked so hard, and we developed a really healthy respect for the pioneer families because of what they went through. And we realized that they made the sacrifices and we live off the fat of their efforts. And should you not respect that? It's like going downtown and looking at the Haliburton cenotaph or any cenotaph. You look at the names on the cenotaph and you realize these fellows made sacrifices so that we are here today. We should definitely pay tribute and respect what they did. And I sort of look at a museum as, in a way, like a cenotaph to the pioneer families.
And is it this which has been so important to you? You've said that, you've never been in it for the money, although it's been good to get a paycheck, let's admit. Yeah. But is it this connection to the pioneers and how they have formed the community that was so important to you?
It was very important because I would talk to different people and they would be proud of their ancestors, but at the same time, they didn't, most of them didn't brag about their ancestors, but you knew their ancestors had done this and that to make the town what it was. And certain people just took it in stride, but they were proud of it. And I thought, you know what? These people that made the sacrifices, I don't want to see them forgotten. Now, I know I'm an outsider to the area and maybe I have no right to an opinion, but really, I look at the sacrifices the pioneer families made and the later families made and the hardships people in Haliburton went through, but they dig their heels in, they're fighters, they're not quitters, and they're still here. To me, that warrants a lot of respect. That warrants being remembered because a lot of Haliburton grew up before the days of a lot of the social safety nets, and people worked hard for what they had. And I don't know, I just can't help but admire somebody that gets up at the crack of dawn and works right through till the moon's coming up and they're in the fields all day or they're in the bush all day, but they're working and struggling because they know they have little mouths to feed at home. And this is what you do. It's what you have to do. And you make sacrifices and you break your back to carry them out. And I really admire people that do that sort of thing because, in all fairness, my generation's grown up pretty soft.
Over the years, there's been a lot of people who have supported the idea of the museum and the history of Haliburton and Haliburton County in general. And I think that certainly shows through on what you've done with the museum and those you've worked with. But the entire scheme of the museum seems to be an important lynch point for people to be able to look to it and say, okay, I understand who we are and I understand why we are. That's a pretty powerful part that the museum plays.
Well, I guess we've succeeded then in being able to convey the message because I want people to appreciate what their forebears did. And I respect what my forebears did, but it just happened to not be in Haliburton where they lived. But what I'm getting at is that people, as I say, worked pretty hard, made a lot of sacrifices, and it should be remembered. And it's nice to be able to go into the museum in any given town and see that reflected in the displays. It perpetuates the memory of those who did all the work to make the community that we have today.
So, Steve, after 39 years, you made the decision to retire. And now that you're thinking about that, what goes through your mind?
Oh man, you know what? I have to say, I I really have mixed feelings. I don't really want to retire. The history of the town has been, I know this sounds kind of phony, but I mean this sincerely. It's been a life to me, and I've tried to stay focused on it in order to make sure I could do the best job I could at the museum. And it's been a routine. Now it's going to be weird to get up in the morning and, oh, wait, I don't have to go to work today. And that's going to be a big adjustment
Yeah.
because I've really enjoyed what I've done and I've really enjoyed the people of Haliburton. And I hope to stay in the community because I made some friends here and people that I really admire for their stamina and their hard work. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna have trouble just turning my back on almost 40 years of local history.
Steve, I know you're going to have a quiet retirement function, which is very much your style, but there must be dozens of people who like to say thank you. Have you ever thought about the positive impact that you've had on the community?
To be honest with you, Mike, I've never thought of it that way. I just went and did my job. But if I've had a positive impact on the community, I thank people for feeling that way. And I also would say I'm grateful that I was able to do that because Sam Charlton, that used to work out at the Haliburton dump, he said, what are we here for as municipal employees except to make the town a better place to live? And I always liked his philosophy. He said, I'm not here for the paycheck. Well, of course, I need bread on my table, but as Sam said, you're here to do your part to make a better town. And one of the museum's best friends over the years was Don Johnston, who was involved with the Legion and the curling club. And he had his finger in every pie, including 25 years at Walling's Dairy. And I asked him one time about the community things that he had been involved in. And I said, Don, you're a celebrity, but you never get your picture in the paper. And he looked at me and he said, when you live in a town, you don't do things to get your picture in the paper. You do these things. It's your town. So you do it to make a better town for everybody. And he said, we did a lot of things and people don't know to this day certain things that the Legion did, but it was always done with the community in mind. Community first, accolades way down on the list. We're doing this for the community. And I thought, Don, you've got the right idea, just like Sam. And I thought, if I'm at the museum working away, I'm not doing it for personal glory. I'll take any thanks people want to give me, but like I've done it for the people of Haliburton because in a lot of ways they're so close to their own history and I can't force them to like history. I mean, in some ways, they lived it and maybe they don't want to remember some of the hardships. But by and large, I admire people that have risen to the occasion and succeeded. And I think it's something to be proud of. And I just feel that anything like that is important and should be remembered.
Well, Steve, you've been a champion of historical knowledge, and that has helped everyone be better informed and aware of who we are and why we are. And on behalf of everyone, let me say best wishes on your retirement. As Bob Hope always said, thanks for the memory. Thank you very much for joining us today.
I want to say thank you, Mike, to you for the interview and to the Highlander and the Echo for the interviews. And I want to thank my colleagues over the years and people of Haliburton for supporting the museum and supporting me as I approach them with my millions of questions. I'm grateful to have worked here. I am grateful to be part of the community, and seriously, I don't know how to say it except thank you very much. It's been a pleasure working here.
Thanks again, Steve. Steve
You're
Hill
welcome.
is curator of the Haliburton Highlands Museum, and he will retire after 39 years of service and a love of museums that spans almost half a century.
Can I add one thing to get on the air then?
Sure.
In those 39 years, the Leafs still haven't won the cup.
Thank you for
sorry.
that side note, Steve.
I had to say that. I'm sorry. I'm a suffering fan. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, Steve. Thank you.